year ago, America fell in love with a singing janitor from Terre Haute.
Oh, Richard Goodall won, you might remember, America's Got Talent.
For years, people in Terre Haute, Indiana walked past a man with a mop and a bucket and never gave him a second glance. He was just the custodian, the guy who kept the floors shining and the cafeteria tables wiped down before the lunch bell rang. Nobody in that hallway could have guessed that the same voice humming along to classic rock while he worked would one day fill arenas, win a national television competition, and eventually force him to make a decision that quietly closed one of the biggest chapters of his life. Richard Goodall's story has always looked, from the outside, like a fairy tale about a janitor who got discovered. But the deeper you look into what actually happened to him, the more it becomes clear that this was never really a story about luck. It was a story about a man who spent decades hiding something in plain sight, and who has now, finally, at 56 years old, stopped hiding it. Richard Goodall grew up in and around Terre Haute, Indiana, and for the better part of his adult life, nothing about his day-to-day existence suggested he was destined for a national spotlight. He took a job as a custodian with the Vigo County School Corporation and stayed there for well over 2 decades, eventually settling into his post at West Vigo Middle School. To the students who passed him in the hallway every morning, he wasn't a mystery. He was simply Richard, the friendly janitor who said hello, kept the building running, and occasionally broke into song while he pushed a cart of cleaning supplies down the corridor. What most people didn't know was that music had never been a passing interest for him. He grew up singing, joined choirs, performed karaoke with friends on weekends, and spent years as part of a small gospel trio that traveled around the Terre Haute area performing at churches and community events. To Goodall, singing wasn't a career plan. It was simply part of who he was, the same way another person might describe themselves as a morning person or a lifelong reader. Those who heard him sing back then often walked away with the same reaction. That voice did not belong in a small gospel hall or a karaoke bar. It belonged somewhere much bigger. But Goodall never chased that idea seriously. He had a job, a routine, and a life that felt stable, and for a long time that was enough. Everything changed because of a moment Goodall didn't even choose. In 2022, a student at West Vigo Middle School quietly filmed him singing Journey's "Don't Stop Believin'" while he worked in the cafeteria, and posted the clip online without telling him beforehand. He had no idea it was happening. By the time he found out, the video was already circulating far beyond anything he could have anticipated. Within days, news outlets had picked up the story, strangers online were sharing it in droves, and even television personality Howie Mandel came across the clip and said publicly that a voice like that belonged on a much bigger stage than a middle school cafeteria. Goodall, for his part, kept showing up to work in the same uniform, doing the same job he had done for more than 20 years. He wasn't chasing the attention, and in many ways, he didn't fully understand what it might lead to. What almost nobody realized at the time was that this wasn't his first attempt at a bigger stage. He had actually auditioned for The Voice at an earlier point in his life, hoping for some kind of break, and had heard nothing back. No callback, no explanation, just silence. He absorbed that disappointment quietly and went back to his normal life, treating it the way most people treat rejection, as something you carry and move past, not something you announce to the world. 2 years after that cafeteria video first went viral, producers from America's Got Talent finally reached out. In May of 2024, Goodall boarded an airplane for the first time in his entire life and flew to Los Angeles to audition in front of the judges. He had never traveled west of the Missouri River before that trip, and by his own account, the entire experience felt like stepping into a world that had nothing to do with the one he knew back home. His nerves were visible the moment he walked on stage, but once the music started, something in him settled. His rendition of "Don't Stop Believin'" moved the room enough that Judge Heidi Klum pressed her golden buzzer, sending him directly to the live shows without another audition required. Simon Cowell later called it one of his favorite audition moments in the show's history. From there, Goodall treated every performance less like a competition and more like an opportunity he refused to take for granted. He dedicated a ballad to his partner during the quarterfinals, brought raw intensity to "Eye of the Tiger" in the semifinals, and closed out the finale with a performance of "Faithfully" that left much of the audience in tears. When the season ended, Goodall was named the winner, becoming the oldest champion in the show's history at 55 years old, and the first vocalist to take the title in 5 years. On paper, it read like a storybook ending. But the real story behind that win was heavier than anything the cameras captured. Long before Goodall ever stepped onto that stage in Los Angeles, he had already lived through loss most people never saw. After his disappointment with The Voice, he He found some comfort performing with his small gospel band, but when the pandemic hit, that entire chapter collapsed almost overnight. Venues closed, gatherings stopped, and the band that had given him a sense of purpose outside of work quietly fell apart. Then came the loss that changed everything. In 2021, Goodall's first wife, Patricia Sue, passed away from kidney cancer. She had stood beside him through years of quiet disappointment and unfulfilled dreams, and her death left him navigating a kind of grief that doesn't fade on any predictable timeline. He kept showing up to work every morning, not because the pain had lessened, but because that discipline was simply part of who he was. Those close to him, though, could hear something different in his voice whenever he sang afterward, a weight that hadn't been there before. That sorrow never fully disappeared. It became part of the emotional depth that would later move millions of viewers who had no idea what he had actually been through. Life eventually offered him something he wasn't looking for. In 2022, Goodall met a woman named Angie, long before any of the television attention began. She knew him simply as Richard, not as a viral clip or a future contestant on a reality show, and over time she became the steady presence who supported him through the entire whirlwind of his America's Got Talent run. Just days before the season finale, the two were quietly married in California, choosing a private ceremony over a televised spectacle. Family and close friends attended, and the couple shared a quiet dinner on the beach before returning to the chaos of finale week. When Goodall won, he credited Angie directly, saying her support was one of the biggest reasons he found the courage to keep going through every round of the competition. Perhaps the most surprising part of Goodall's story has nothing to do with singing at all. It was Angie who encouraged him to finally look into something he had quietly wondered about his entire life: the identity of his biological father. Goodall had been adopted as an infant and had carried that unanswered question with him since childhood, never fully expecting to find any answers. Using an ancestry service, Goodall and Angie eventually located a man named Hubert, a retired K-9 police officer and Army veteran living not far away in Indiana. Remarkably, Hubert had no idea Goodall existed until the two connected. Their reunion revealed something else Goodall never anticipated: 3 siblings he had never known about growing up. According to Goodall, Hubert had actually recognized him first, having seen his face on television during the America's Got Talent season and suspecting a connection before either of them said a word. When the two men finally spoke, Hubert reportedly asked if Goodall was the same janitor from the singing competition, still processing the fact that a child he never knew he had was someone he had already watched on national television. Goodall shared the discovery publicly, introducing his biological father to fans and thanking Angie for pushing him to search in the first place. He later admitted that without her encouragement, he likely would have left that part of his history unanswered forever, the way he had made peace with doing for most of his adult life. Meeting Hubert didn't erase the decades of not knowing, but it gave him something he had stopped expecting to find: a living connection to the other half of his own story. Once the cameras stopped rolling, most people assumed Goodall would walk away from his custodial job entirely and chase music full-time. Instead, he went right back to work at West Vigo Middle School, cleaning classrooms and waxing floors the same way he always had. When asked why, his answer was simple: he genuinely loved the students, the staff, and the sense of structure that job had given him for more than 20 years. His hometown embraced him for staying grounded. He received a key to the city of Terre Haute, and the school held an emotional pep rally in his honor, filled with students cheering and staff thanking him for representing their community with such humility. That same community had shown up for him long before he won anything, pooling their own money through local fundraisers to help cover the cost of his very first trip to Los Angeles. Even while balancing his old job, new opportunities kept arriving. Goodall sang the national anthem at an Indiana Pacers game, opened a show for fellow AGT favorite Howie Mandel, and performed at local holiday events, all while still clocking in most mornings. Rather than rushing into a record deal, he took his music career slowly, releasing his debut single, Long Time Coming, in August of 2025, recorded in Nashville with experienced producers. He also joined a smaller local group called Sugar Street, using those low-pressure shows to grow as an artist away from the spotlight. In August of 2025, he returned to the America's Got Talent stage for the show's 20th anniversary special, later performing his new single alongside Journey guitarist Neil Schon during the season 20 finale, a full-circle moment tied directly back to the song that started his entire journey. For a long time, Goodall balanced 2 entirely different lives, one behind a mop and one behind a microphone, and he seemed genuinely comfortable keeping both. That balance has now shifted in a way many of his fans quietly suspected was coming but weren't sure he would actually admit. In the summer of 2026, after 25 years of service, Richard Goodall officially retired from his custodial position with the Vigo County School Corporation. He described the decision as emotional rather than easy, admitting that walking those familiar hallways for the final time hit him harder than he expected. The quiet mornings before students arrived had always felt peaceful to him, but once the hallways filled with kids one last time, the reality of leaving finally caught up with him. He was honest about the fear behind the decision too, acknowledging openly that a career in entertainment is far less stable than a steady paycheck, and that walking away from decades of security was genuinely frightening rather than simple. In many ways, that admission is the real headline behind his story. After years of insisting music was just a part of his life alongside his job, he has finally admitted, out loud, that it is now the whole path he intends to walk. Alongside the retirement came another announcement few people saw coming. Goodall signed a deal with production companies to bring his life story to the big screen as a feature film, with a screenwriter attached to develop the script. The producers behind the project pointed to his win, his marriage, and the surprise discovery of his biological family as proof that his life was almost too unbelievable not to tell. Through it all, Goodall has remained remarkably grounded, still describing himself as an ordinary guy who happened to get the chance of a lifetime, and joking that nobody could have made up a story quite like his own even if they tried. Looking back at everything, from a cafeteria video nobody asked him to make, to a wedding on a California beach, to losing a wife and finding a father he never knew existed, Goodall's journey reads less like a stroke of luck and more like years of quiet persistence finally catching up with him all at once. What he has finally admitted, after decades of keeping his music tucked quietly behind his job, his grief, and his uncertainty, is something many people who watched him sing in that cafeteria video had already suspected: that voice was never meant to stay behind a mop forever.